Stella. Barbara or Stephen, could you just confirm that you can hear us okay virtually?
Yes, all good.
Well, thank you.
Do we have a quorum?
Inches. So we've got joining virtually, we have Barbara, Laura, and Steve. What's our number again?
Need 8, right? Or 7? Need 8.
We have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Right. Cool. Are we good to go? Awesome. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the March meeting of the Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee. My name is Vitor. I'm your vice chair. I'm going to be leading tonight's session. Alessandra is out of town. So for those who are not here usually, we are a mayor-appointed body of volunteers that usually advise the city on matters related to pedestrian and transit, usually taking account effective, sustainable, equitable, and accessible experiences for our residents. We were established in 2020 through the Vision Zero Action Plan, and as you probably know, our votes are all advisory. Many of our recommendations help the city do their work, but they are non-binding in nature. Who is our secretary tonight?
I am. This is Steve.
Okay, Steve, thank you. So let's do a quick roll call. Ted Alexander? Here. Jeannie Alberson? I don't see Jeannie. Meredith Brown? Laura Evans?
Here.
Christopher Ferry? Preston Gutierrez? Here. Satoko Hirai?
Here.
Brenda Marvin? Steve Mulder?
Here.
Barbara Myers?
Here.
Bianca Nakunas? Myself here, Zach Rosenberg? Alessandra is not with us today, and Mackenzie Webb. Our city councilor, Ben, is not with us today, but we do have Kate and Justin with us here. Do we have any guests? We have many guests. So let's do this quickly. We have about 5 minutes or so For the guests online and in person, we're gonna enable you to speak in the call. Just please introduce yourself, just first name and ward number. And if you have any reason to be here tonight or you want to give any public comments, just say so. We're going to call you later to do so. You want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Zachary Orzia. I live in Ward 6. I have interest in many pedestrian and transit-related projects around the city, but I'm particularly interested to ask about some of the things the Davis Square Neighborhood Council has been working on around pedestrian improvements in Davis Square.
Okay, cool. Who can be next?
Oh, no,
Oh, sorry. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Emily Urbanski, within 5, and I have been coming to a few of the PTAC meetings recently, just interested in pedestrian and transit infrastructure and want to be more involved.
Awesome. Thank you.
The other one.
Let's try Camden. Let's see if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Camden. I live near Union Square, and I'm just attending to stay abreast of pedestrian and transit happenings in the community.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Next, let's go to Evan.
It's Ewan. I don't know what.
Oh, sorry, we blocked you. Can you say it again?
Sorry, you and you should be able to unmute it now.
Oh, sorry. Hi, this is Ewan. I don't know which ward I'm in specifically. I know I live in Craigie Street, but I'm here with the Somerville Times. Just a quick question. This will be on YouTube, right?
Yes, so all recordings out for all PTAC meetings are recorded and posted on the city website under the city calendar or the PTAC website.
Okay. Thank you.
Karen Malloy, want to say a few words?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm in Ward 5. I'm a member of Somerville Alliance for Safe Streets, but I'm here on my own. Curious about the conversation regarding the new 85 route that you all will be having this evening, and also the mobility discussion about their design and processes for street reconstruction.
Perfect. Let's try Mark Levy or Levi. Mark, see if you can unmute yourself. Maybe we try Mark later. Let's see. Nikalia.
Oh, there's Mark.
Hello, my name is Nicolaya. I work for the Boston Center for Independent Living, and I am the new transit advocate for the Riders Transportation Access Group that works with the MBTA. And I'm here just to learn more about the bus route changes and the street redesign development processes to get started on our new municipal coordination working group. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Mark, want to try again?
I'm Mark Levy, and I do a website called the Cambridge Somerville Independent, and I'm just here to listen for the purposes of reporting and just learning and reporting, I guess.
Thanks, everybody. Let's go through. Oh, so we have our February meetings to approve. Does anybody, any member, has any question about minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. This is Ted.
Anybody second?
I'll second. Preston.
Preston seconds. Everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Yeah,
Christopher's joined.
Perfect. We do not have any announcements. Let's go to public comments. Is anybody here would like to spend a few minutes to do public comments that we can capture and reply to you later? Especially any of the guests that would like to speak. This is the moment. if you are online, I think you can raise your hand and we will see it as well. Otherwise, we're just going to move forward to the presentation. I guess that's a no.
Is this the only time for people to speak about things that aren't on the agenda?
That are not on the agenda.
Okay. I don't.
You want to do it?
Yeah, I also am happy to chat about this over email some other time, but I wanted to get an updated sense of the Davis Square Neighborhood Council's LMA Action Group had proposed some quick build safety improvements on Elm Street, like putting out planters to narrow the travel area, which is significantly wider than the one travel lane and two parking lanes that it's officially supposed to be. And since I last asked someone from the city about that, we've been talking with folks from the Somerville Garden Club who already maintain some of the garden space around the library, the West Branch Library near Davis Square. And there's interest in from some neighborhood council folks in working with the Somerville Garden Club to potentially maintain those planters. And so I was kind of hoping that this group might have a sense of how we can engage with the city further to get permission to do something like that. Some of those improvements to kind of narrow the available roadway and hopefully encourage safer driving down the segment of Elm Street near the commercial center of Davis Square.
Yeah, well, we're happy to accept the public comment. Again, that's something we have to take back to our team and provide more information, but we appreciate that you both reach out in public comment and also by email.
Yeah, I know the last time we talked, one of the issues you had said was who would maintain those planters. So that's the biggest update is connecting with the Somerville Garden Club about potentially doing that.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. Anybody else on public comments? Great. Okay, let's go through subcommittee updates. Design review and special projects did not meet. Community events.
Yeah. Anyone else want to take this? Okay. Yeah. So the community events subcommittee met on a cold and blustery night at Assembly Square last week, and walked around a little bit in the neighborhood. We're thinking about planning a walk audit in Assembly Square, kind of like what we did in Union Square. It's a little bit of a different place, and there's no immediate plans from the city to do any specific project there. So we are considering some options and looking at probably doing that sometime later this year, but still figuring it out. So we had a good walk around ourselves and kind of took a peek at some of the routes in and out of Assembly and talked about maybe walking there to give suggestions for improving access.
Awesome, thank you, Tad. Okay, I think this sets us up for a lot of discussion time. You guys ready? Mm-hmm. So the city has two conversations tonight. One is the upcoming changes for CT2 and the 85 bus routes. And the second part of the talk will be mostly about design development process that they follow through, trying to explain to us how they work and how many people are involved. So this is going to be a more open-ended discussion later on how the city does develop their projects. So make sure you have questions, because they're going to be here all the time.
All right. Thank you, Vitor. So, yes, starting with the spring 2026 Better Bus Network service changes. And just a note on Better Bus Network is how the MBTA is referring to these now. They did the bus network redesign, and now when they implement it, they're calling it the Better Bus Network. So just that's why you're not seeing the bus network redesign term anymore. So the spring rating, 4 times a year, the MBTA has a rating, which means they're updating their schedules and their routes. So that is April 5th, and they're making changes on the CT2, the 40, the 50, the 85, the 87, and the 350. CT2, 85, and 87, those are the ones that touch Somerville. And there's a link here, and again, this will be posted so you can see the MBTA's detailed webpage on this. Starting with the 87. 87 currently travels between Leechmere and Clarendon Hill and sometimes Arlington Center, using mostly Somerville Ave as well as Elm Street and Holland Street and Broadway. So going forward, all of the trips are going to go to Arlington. So that provides a lot more service getting from Somerville to Arlington and back, particularly weekday evenings, Saturday evenings, and Sundays. So still stopping at Clarendon Hill, but not turning into the busway on the way out, at least, and just continuing on down Broadway to Arlington Center. That one is pretty straightforward. The next change is a little more complicated, which is the CT2 and 85 consolidating into a new route, 85. These are both routes that run only during weekdays, and they will continue to run only during weekdays. It will essentially follow the existing routes from Ruggles to Sullivan Square, except now, if you were formerly a CT2 rider, it's stopping at every bus stop versus the limited service that the CT2 used to provide. It's weekdays only. They're extending the hours a little bit, 5:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. A little more frequency, 15 to 25 minutes at peaks and 30 to 45 off peak. So slightly better frequency. The ring around Spring Hill and Bow Street, which has been on hold since the city's Spring Hill sewer separation, is going to discontinue permanently. And then that means that Somerville and Hawkins Streets, Bow Street and Warren Ave and 51 Bow, those stops will no longer be served by the Route 85 permanently. And then everything on the CT2, if you're using the user of the CT2, that stays the same. Those stops still are in operation. So before we move on, I guess I could pause for a sec to see if there's any questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
So the CT2, right? Every time it hits traffic, it's just not reliable.
Yeah.
And so if it's now going to stop at every stop, how are they going to ensure that like it's a consistent, reliable service during rush hour? Because if you're taking it to work, you need to be at work on time, right?
Yeah. I imagine it's going to hit a lot of the same traffic it hits today.
Yeah.
One thing that's different is when there's only like a handful of buses throughout the day, they very much stick to this. They try to stick to the schedule, at least at the beginning. When they have slightly more frequent service, they can do like the headway management, where they're not necessarily going by a schedule. They're going by how far apart the buses are. It still is not a super frequent service, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the same delay. But the city's also working on transit priority, including on Washington Street and through Union Square. But it will likely experience a lot of the same delay.
Okay, so if it does, is there like a mitigation plan or I'm like, how do they decide on this new service? Did they do test runs and how do they make these decisions? I guess is one, and then two, if it turns out that it makes it worse, is there a forum for people to submit their complaints?
Yeah, the consolidation comes from the bus network redesign, and this route was proposed to consolidate into one.
Yeah.
The plan actually has it going on McGrath. It can't go on McGrath today because there's no sidewalk on the southbound side of McGrath. So they are still planning long term to have this on McGrath. The MBTA does accept feedback. Service planning at mbta.com. I don't think they plan on reverting it, but they do a number of test runs ahead of these changes. Anytime they're changing a route, they're running test buses. They're both existing routes, so I imagine they're using the existing operations to fine tune the schedule. But certainly would expect congestion in Union Square and peak towers.
Let's go to Steve online.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question around Do we know if they really looked closely at the weekday only versus every day in the schedule? This was an opportunity to revisit that potentially, but I'm curious how that came up, how that was talked about.
I think in the bus network redesign, they essentially got to increase service by 25% overall. So it's not a revenue neutral bus network redesign. They are trying to like eventually get to 25% more service hours than they had when that study was done in 2019 to 2022. And I'm sure that they received many comments asking folks to make this an all-day service. This is essentially exactly what was in the plan. I think one of their main justifications is there is also the 47 bus, which is not in effect now, but eventually will extend a very similar type service from the Rebels Fenway area, but we'll go through Central Square instead up to Union Square. So that exists today, but it ends at Central. The bus network redesign has it going to Union Square in East Somerville. So I think they think of this as more of a supplementary service to Kendall Square to serve that like high commute weekday pattern. We don't have the 47 at this time, but in the long term there'll be a much more frequent service for getting to the Fenway LMA area.
Justin, can you confirm if there is any line of communication with them related to this specific project, and how is the city and or the MBTA going to follow the development to see if it needs changes or not?
Sure. We meet regularly with the MBTA. We worked on additional layover locations for them in Assembly, both because there's more service here, and when we eventually have additional routes, we're going to need more space for the end and beginning of routes. So there was a little less required in terms of infrastructure, but the past like phase one of bus network redesign, there was some infrastructure that had to change. So whenever they're getting ready for these implementations of the better bus network, they have a list of like nice to have to have things in terms of transit priority, in terms of like having enough space for operators for the restroom, that sort of thing. So some of those things we work together on, some of the things they work together, they work on their own on it, and we do. We meet regularly with them to talk about how it's going.
Anybody else? Ted?
Yeah, this is Ted. Just I think along the lines of the questions have already been asked, and knows that both the 85 route and the 87 are both getting longer. I mean, essentially, and I know that can cause problems with reliability of service, and just wondering how the MTA is thinking and communicating about that. Because I mean, especially here, I could see that I think it's great that this is going to Assembly now. Probably provide some more access there, but I could see there being sometimes a lot of traffic between Sullivan and Assembly, and that does duplicate the orange line. So I wonder if they would consider kind of if there's some kind of metric they have that in mind that like if they don't meet this threshold of service, they can change or cut it back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have a specific metric. I think on the whole, the city trusts the transit planners to propose a route they think is realistic. But there are certain routes that have gotten a lot longer and a lot shorter. And part of it is working on the transit priority and try to cut out some of the bottlenecks that happen. Day-to-day operations is more in the MBTA's court to see what's going on. Certainly they can reach out for us if they want any assistance.
I take the 85 like 2 or 3 days a week to go to work in Kendall Square, so I'm actually very excited about these changes. Just like having the increased frequency, and also like hopefully I believe this plan will get rid of that like awkward gap in the middle of the day. Like the 85 doesn't run between like 9:30 and 2:30, and so sometimes like it'll, you know, if I want to take like a meeting in the morning at home and then go into work, like I can't really do that if it's after 9:30. So I'm really excited for this, but also like kind of cautiously optimistic, because I have seen, I think last meeting we saw like the on time numbers for the CT2, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize that I guess like remains to be seen, but very cautiously optimistic about these changes.
Yeah. And I will point out there's a whole bunch of transit priority underway in the Sullivan Square area. The square itself is a little more longer term, but on the Mystic Ave going out and the Broadway coming in, MassDOT is finishing up bus lanes that will sort of completely, that little triangle on the top of this image, there'll be bus lanes in every direction the bus will get to use. So we're looking forward to that because that's quite a congested area getting into Sullivan Square.
Cool. Let's go online, Christopher.
Yeah, I guess my question was, since Summer Street is being rebuilt or was rebuilt, complete with floating bus stops, does the city have any plans for how to handle those spaces? Will those get relabeled as, taxi stands or something else? Or, is there, I know there's been talk in the past about the city looking at a smaller vehicle service for the hillier sections of the city. I know I've always appreciated that, when you could catch it, the 85 going up Spring Hill was much better than walking.
The answer is not at this time, but open to ideas. Unfortunately, that project was complete and out to a contractor before we really had any guarantee that this was going to happen. There are 2, maybe 3 floating bus stops that are no longer necessary.
One idea that's been floated around is potentially bike parking.
Yeah. But no plans at this time.
Anybody else?
Kieran has her hand up.
Karen Malloy?
Hi, thank you. Sort of following up on the earlier question about the actual schedule of the 85. I'm concerned about it not running on the weekends. Has that ever been discussed? The reason I'm asking this is, when the bus network redesign was underway back, as you said, 2019 to 2022, the MBTA was saying, oh, we want to update these bus schedules, these bus routes and schedules from, the 1950s or whatever it was. And I mean, it just seems odd that this new 85, which has a great route, and I'm glad to see that there's more frequency, but it's not going to be running on the weekends. Is this somehow people don't need transit on the weekends? So, is this like you said that maybe they're going to increase the hours during the day later on? Are they thinking at all about the weekends when people still need transit? Thank you.
Not that I'm aware of. I think if folks look back at the bus network redesign, we do have many new high frequency routes where we have none today. This itself is not the most exciting route of the new routes that are happening in the bus network redesign. And like I mentioned before, there's the 47, which will duplicate more than 50% of this route and will be high frequency every day of the week. But this is essentially as proposed in the network redesign. And as far as the city is aware, the T does not have any plans to make it run on the weekend this time.
Thank you. My other question, and I was really pleased to hear about the bus priority lane, going in around Sullivan Square. I mean, that's a huge choke point. But what about the signal? Is it going to be any signal priority along this line for the other the other traffic nightmares that from Assembly down to Ruggles?
Yes, yeah, the project, the intersections on the Mystic Ave and Broadway, those all have bus lanes, which will have bus signals and transit priority, as well as Interbelt Road today has a bus lane in one direction, has a transit signal, has transit priority. We have the bus lane heading towards McGrath. And so the answer is yes, and we're working on more as well.
I guess I was specifically thinking more about the CT2, the CT2 end. They're going to be um, any I guess the term is signal I know they're not bus lanes there, but what about signal, signal priority, I guess, at the
Which location?
um let's see. It's been a while since I've been on the CT2. It's just as people have been speaking about how long this route is going to be, I was just thinking about the spots that um would need, how to make it the smoothest, fastest, throughput basically.
Yeah. Yeah, we have it in a couple locations. There's a couple more that'll come out in the assembly area through that MassDOT project. And we're working on even more TBA soon. So I think the answer is yes, not at every intersection, but at many intersections.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Just a question around, like, some other people have commented about how a lot of these lines have gotten really long and now are spanning like Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, like many different jurisdictions. Like, is there any thought around like standardizing or trying to get like all the different municipalities like have the same, kind of transit priority and things like that? Because, it's like we could do everything perfectly in Somerville, but if this bus goes to, Boston and they have no bus lanes or no signal priority, like it's gonna cause backups that like we don't really have control over. Is there any like conversation between like the municipalities on like getting on the same page of those sorts of things?
Yeah. I guess this conversation is making me think we should maybe invite in the T's transit priority team at some point, because they can talk in a lot more detail. But they do have like a priority network where they want to see transit priority. It's mostly the high frequency routes. They can't really dictate what other cities do. I guess potentially the state could, but the META can't really dictate what other states do. But many of the municipalities work with the T, and they provide funding, they do some design, they do some implementation, and the designs are getting more standard. So, there's like this section of this route in Boston. We can't really control what Boston does there. They have at various times proposed bus infrastructure there, but there's nothing that I know of that's happening. But the MBTA does, they do work with all the municipalities. They have regular meetings like with us. They have them with many of the municipalities. And, they do really work as much as they can to get transit priority. They help cities implement it. So, yeah. And they could come in, they could speak a little more to like the headway management and like how they evaluate and, the more sort of nuts and bolts of like transit planning. It could be good at some point to bring them in.
Maybe just to finish, should we try to advocate for something here, maybe an evaluation on how this new route will be done? Maybe the city can reserve some funds and do some analysis on where the problems are.
I think it's perfectly fine to ask the T, to tell us how it's going. And there's also Transit Matters does a lot of performance. So if someone wanted to look into that more, it will take a few months for things to settle down, but they do provide a lot of that. They do like an annual report also on like the fastest and slowest routes. I think we unfortunately won one of those slow routes last year. But yeah, I think the T also data requests and things like that. They do publish a lot of that stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. But it's not something the city is interested in doing by itself.
I think not at this time, right? But there's many, the bus network redesign is a very complex web of changes, and the city, I think, we need to pick our battles in terms of what we need to push for. But that's not to say there couldn't be opportunities to push the MBTA or to push the city in a certain direction based on how it performs.
Cool. Any other question? I guess, Steve, do you have another question?
Yeah, just an idea, which is years ago, as part of STEP, we did a bus survey in Somerville, sort of, satisfaction with various bus routes, and it was our way of kind of from a citizenry feeding back input on the bus routes. And I'm wondering, with all these changes, this could be something once we're kind of settled into the new rhythm of the Better Bus Network, this could be something that's worth repeating from the ground up.
That's a great idea. I think that MBTA does something similar as well. And I forgot to mention, if you do ride this bus, there will be T folks at platforms and on buses, a couple weeks before and a couple weeks into. So if you see someone in an orange vest, they probably have a T button. You can feel free to enter a little bit about what's going on.
Awesome. Do we have anybody else? Yes. Cool.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Great discussion. Okay, so the officers asked us to come to this meeting to talk a little bit about the process of developing changes to street design. So Kate and I have a couple slides here, about 6 or 7 slides, to give like a broad overview of sort of the types of projects, the types of outreach engagements that we run, and timelines, and sort of all of the things that go into trying to come up with a new street design. So I think we'll present, but also feel free to just chime in or raise hands virtually if you have questions. And to kick us off, just want to talk a minute about like typical projects that we have. First category is quick build projects. These are changes to signs, lines, and posts, changes that are made typically without major construction, not moving curbs, really just reconfiguring using the space that's already out there and using quick build materials. And that's an example from Grand Union Boulevard. The column in the middle is sort of our bread and butter pavement and resurfacing projects. So each year the city has a streets program, and each year the city has some funding from the state, some borrowing, and we tackle a piece of our 5-year sidewalk and paving plan. And a subset of those pavement and sidewalk management program streets are sort of the more complete street, not just putting it back the way it was. And what started 5-6 years ago, it was maybe a bump out here, a bump out there, has really evolved into like a much more comprehensive redo of these streets with new crosswalks, raised crosswalks, enhanced bike lanes, floating bus stops. It's not quite the everything is on the table project. It usually doesn't include utility work, but it does allow us to do more substantial construction. We also do a number of sort of smaller interventions, targeted safety improvements. We have done speed humps for a number of years now, and there's also sometimes targeted intersection improvements that we do alongside those streets projects, but they have sort of a much more limited geographic scope to like one intersection. And then the purple box there is not really typical, but there's a small number of like really, really big utility projects, the Spring Hill Sewer Separation, the Somerville Lab project. Not many of those going on at the moment, but major capital projects that involve completely building the street from the ground up. And we're not really covering those tonight because they can vary a lot more, and really those are led primarily by the engineering division, although mobility does typically get heavily involved with like the engagement process. So there's a little less of a SOP for those, but those come up as well. Next is less typical projects. First one is transportation mitigation. So development projects often have some changes to the public ways that are required by the planning board. Staff in OSBCD make recommendations, and planning board applies those conditions. We do that based on an analysis of transportation impacts. It really could be any kind of project, but it's typically like adjacent or nearby an impacted intersection. The image there is right on Front and South Street, so the bike lane there is a mitigation component of the building, of the project to build this building. The middle column here is we have a lot of programs in collaboration with the T, bus stops, bus lanes, transit signal priority, And I think there's sort of like three types of those. They have system-wide programs like bus stop amenities, or they get some funding from the state to do this specific thing at bus stops, at shelters, whatever it may be, and they're distributing them around the state or around their service area. There's projects that come out of like the T wanting to implement the Better Bus Network and approaching cities and towns to make specific improvements at specific locations. And then, once in a while, they have their own larger capital projects. That floating bus stop and crosswalk on Washington Street is actually related to the Green Line Extension project to make sure that there is good access to the station from East Somerville. So often there could be spin-off projects from something they're doing on a rail project that impact that. Or things like the Davis Square accessibility upgrades that we talked about a while back. They're doing upgrades system-wide to elevators, and they're maybe making changes around stations. The last one is just a big bucket of like everything else. There's lots of other things that can come up. Sometimes MassDOT has a program where they want to partner with municipalities to design improvements on their own streets. Sometimes they're doing their own project, but then there are additional changes they make on local streets. Like that image above is Lombardi Street, underneath, not on top of 93. And that's, it's a local street. It's a part of that big Mystic Matha project, and they included it in their project to sort of make everything work together, and we work with them on that. And then projects that might be locally run through like a variety of like state and federal grant opportunities that for projects that may not have another path, or there may be a specific opportunity based on a certain program. There's, the Gaming Commission has annual grants for cities to make improvements in transportation. MassDOT has a number of opportunities. The feds have a number of opportunities, and that sort of encompasses everything else there. And now Kate's going to talk a little more about engagement.
Yes. So most of these slides due after. Realize the text is a little small, but of the typical projects that the mobility division might take on, we kind of like to categorize them in different types of community engagement campaigns, right? And that's kind of based on the relative impact of the project. So for example, or the three buckets we have are inform community engagement campaign, then involve, and then collaborate. So with our first one, an informed campaign is where we tend to focus primarily on communications and provide updates on the purpose, the scope, the timeline, and opportunities and solutions of the intervention. These are for those smaller projects that we talked about, like your annual speed humps or your intersections, mainly because there's a lot of constraints. If you're implementing speed humps, we do that based on kind of specific thresholds by speeds and volumes or priority land use considerations. And then we try to follow best practices of the spacing on those speed humps, rather than hosting a community meeting to ask people where they want to place them. We don't feel like that is an effective use of both community members' time as well as what we understand as planners. Similar to intersections, there are a lot of constraints on intersections. You need to follow national standards around placements of signal heads or what type of curb ramps you have. And we're really looking at how do we make safety improvements fast. One thing we do want to note is that we also tend to use an informed campaign when a project allows us to try something that makes it safer, which doesn't have a major impact on how the street fundamentally functions. So if you traveled on Middlesex Ave, recently in the last couple of months, we were able to put in protected bike lanes without really impacting parking, impacting the number of lanes, or impacting crosswalks. It was a way that we could create a safe option while you're biking on a street that doesn't have a lot of the residents don't really live on Middlesex Ave. It's kind of the back of a lot of commercial areas except for the courthouse and a few other businesses. And so that's where we do kind of our more light touch community engagement and really just kind of get the word out. I should know as I move into the other campaigns, if you're familiar with the International Association for Public Participation, they have a spectrum for public engagement and they use these terms. And so we kind of base it off of that more kind of international practice, but then kind of focus it in on our mobility projects. Our next one, and I should say sometimes within an informed campaign, we might do a little bit of targeted community outreach. Let's say it's a business that's right next to an intersection, or most of the time it's something like that, where it's like, oh, we just want to double check on delivery operations. For example, Middlesex Ave, we got in touch with the courthouse to just be like, hey, FYI, we're thinking of doing this thing. Do you have any questions? So moving into kind of our Involve campaign, this is where we kind of expand that scope and we really aim to hear public transportation related concerns, provide opportunity for public input, and share how public input influences decision making. It may not be as expansive as the one I'm going to describe last, but it's a way for us that we know that you can't just do the intervention. You want to find some ways to get at some of the needs of the folks who are going to be most impacted. And we test out some other we use some different tools. For things like this, we might do more pop-ups. Getting out on the street, talking to folks who are high frequent users on the street. We might host specific dedicated meetings, both for maybe a specific stakeholder group or a larger public meeting. We might do a walk audit, or we might do some block walking with local businesses. And some example projects, some of you might be familiar with our Glen and Otis Street Neighborway a couple years ago. So this was a quick build intervention. It didn't have major impact on parking. We didn't host a bunch of series of community meetings because it was really just getting out the word about what is a neighborway and talking through our options. And in that one, we explored speed humps. And then we took, which Glen Street is primarily one way, it's just two one ways coming at each other. The neighborway allows for two-way biking. This is similar if you're familiar with the raised intersection that's going to happen at Bow and Walnut. It's going to have quite a few parking spaces removed. And so when we start to see impacts like that, that's when we go and we talk a lot more. If you also go to that area a lot, there's a lot of outdoor dining. There's a lot of small businesses. So that's where we do a lot of small engagement of talking through what are your delivery needs. How do we make sure that you can still operate with your outdoor dining? So lastly, and ones you might be most familiar with, because those are the projects we come and talk to you the most about, is our collaborative campaigns. These are where we kind of really employ a range of both communications and community engagement tools. Everything from your standard meetings to pop-ups to also looking at visioning workshops, or maybe we do a lot of kind of creative workshops with a variety of demographic groups. And again, block walking and feedback surveys. These are all just ways that, we're really trying to, hear public transportation related concerns, provide the opportunity for that public input, share how it influences decision making, often provide options, and then try to gather feedback on preferences, whether it's if that makes someone feel safer or they want more aesthetically like it. And really kind of as you move, provide a couple stages before you finalize design. So that's where we have a lot of our reconstruction projects that we come and talk to you about, as well as your larger quick build projects that have a bigger impact, such as the Elm Beacon Connector, which is going to really fundamentally change the experience on Elm Street and Mawson Street, and same with Somerville Ave, quick build improvements. So I really wanted to set that framing because as we talk about the community, this is the public side of the community engagement. I think the officers wanted to ask us what also happens, right? We talk about how the public's involved, but who are some of the other people who are part of this design development? So as mobility, we often prepare concept designs in-house and often rely on external consultants to develop final engineering designs. If the project involves construction, we always bring on an engineering consultant. And if it's quick build, if it's not too complex, we might do it in-house. But if it is more complex, right, we want to bring in that expertise to make sure we're meeting all of the standard regulations. We then also serve as the main point of contact, both for getting feedback from the public, but also all of our internal partners, right? Internal partners, we kind of list the main ones that we work with, which are engineering, parking, public space and urban forestry, fire, Department of Public Works, economic development, especially if it's in a commercial area, and then lastly, the Traffic Commission. We also are the main point of contact for all the external partners. So we're the folks that talk to the T, to MassDOT, if their projects kind of impact that, right? We definitely touch the T if there's any bus routes in the project area. We talk to TCR if it involves a parkway. And then if it touches any of the borders, we talk to all the other cities. For example, now Beacon Connector, we've been in close conversation, a huge round of engagement with the city of Cambridge, right? Because the intersection right at Beach Street, as well as a lot of the project touches the border. And at the end of design development, our engineering consultants will stamp the plans. And really their role is, you know, they create the construction documents or the implementation documents if you're doing more quick build, but they're your double check of, oh, hey, do we meet these national standards for signal operations? Do we meet our accessibility guidelines? And that's under, you know, things like MUTCD or PROAC, and I have some definitions at the end. Sorry, excuse me. So we just wanted to kind of provide a typical timeline for a quick build project. So we often have two major community engagement phases throughout a project. And we've used a timeline for the El Beacon Connector project to show the example. This is where we've gone out to folks in the beginning to say, what are some of your concerns with the street? As well as try to talk through what are the kind of parameters of the project. If it's quick build, we know we're not doing any major construction. So what are your ideas with the tools that we have available? We might secure an engineering consultant. In a project like this, we definitely do. And they're the folks, like we said, help us bring from concept to final. And they also help us prepare things like cost estimates or specs for the contractors who are going to come and do the work in close dialogue with us. So community feedback is core in how we develop these designs, but we are iterating on these community ideas while we're also making sure we're within those constraints, right? Are we in the right of way of the street? Are we making sure that we're meeting standard practices? So that's a typical quick build. We often do two major community engagement phases because, as you all know, when you provide feedback on projects, with quick build, you have less flexibility in what you can do on the street. And so we kind of have felt that two major stages makes a lot of sense before you come back and you communicate to folks about the final design. It's you gather a lot of their thoughts on problems or ideas, come back with a concept, and then come back with a final design to implement and kind of describe why we made these decisions based on what feedback they gave us in the concept stage. And so moving into reconstruction, we actually expand that. We know we have more opportunity to make changes. And so, you know, for some of you who participated in Western Pro, right, we actually came back at the concept stage with two concepts and said, which one do you think we should do? Along with, within those two concepts, diving into, well, actually, should we kind of do a variation of a raised intersection here, or should we try out this other configuration? So because we have more opportunity to make changes on the street, we add in that extra community engagement phase, which is the same for all our internal and external partners too. Because again, there's just like more, there's more complexity to the project. So again, community feedback is core to what we do, but then we try to iterate on these. And that's where that engineering consultant can be so critical, because you are making sure. What was really fun on Western Pearl, this is more story, but like our consultant was like getting into the telephone ducts to make sure that they're like pipe or the lines were the same as what they had come up and survey. We do a lot more on kind of the grading and the slope of the street. And preparing that documentation so that when they come back and construct it makes sense for the contractor. So kind of going into our next slide, we kind of wanted to synthesize how do we make some of these decisions. You know, it's something that people ask us all the time. You know, what's your defining factor that says, okay, you go this way, you go that? I think as you all might know by now, the city really tries to follow the commitments we've put out there. We have a Vision Zero action plan, that's our guiding light, and we have these other guides or plans, like the Climate Forward plan, which is really thinking about mode shift and sustainable options, and the Bicycle Network plan, which is thinking of our 88-mile connected network. And that was, again, codified in the Safe Streets Ordinance. So that's like your baseline. We then plan and conduct community engagement campaigns to inform specific design directions on top of that baseline. So if someone came to us, and I think we've all been in rooms together where that's happened, where they're like, I want you to remove all the bike lanes and only have parking. We don't do that. The baseline is that we follow these commitments that we've described. So we aim to focus on what we learn in community engagement and develop solutions that really increase the safety and encourage more use of sustainable transportation options. But we do always need to weigh these design ideas or the community feedback we get with the regulations that we must follow. And so here we've listed some more specific, the manual for uniform traffic control devices. You know, that's our document that kind of says how can you have stop signs, or can you have these types of signals, or if you have signals, what should they look like? Same with Americans with Disabilities Act. Some of the things that are interesting with the ADA guidelines is that they're a minimum. And so to actually have a sidewalk that's ADA compliant, it's only 3-foot clear passage. So I think things that we talk about with accessibility, there's like the minimums, but then also we always try to expand on that. And then there's more recent updates on the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines, or PROAG. So those, again, we must meet those standards. We then work to follow best practices from our partners, both locally and nationally. So we reference the National Association of City Transportation Officials a lot. This is a really great organization that provides best practices they've seen across really across the world, but they really reference a lot of examples from North America. And so when Seattle is testing this type of protected bike lane, we can learn from that, or see we learned a lot, like when we were looking at DC, about how they had a lot more of their bus stops next to protected bike lanes. We also have our own emerging best practices within the city. 5 or 10 years ago, the streets looked really different, right? So if you have fire trucks operating, the fire department is also iterating on what are their best practices for making sure that they can still meet emergency operations, but they're navigating through narrower streets that have curb extensions or speed humps. So they work closely with us to kind of developing what do we think are our internal standards. It's the same for engineering. If you go on Washington Street and you look at our accessible spaces, that is an engineering division style accessible parking space, because they felt it was important to have a accessible curb ramp through the length of the space, that the space was longer. But that is something that the engineering division has developed. It's not necessarily what is the ADA type of space. Same with DPW. DPW is constantly learning. We learned a lot this last season. How do you maintain the types of facilities that we're putting in the street? What types of equipment are available? And same with parking department. What tools can you use to more efficiently regulate the curb? And one thing we wanted to know, and we know this came up in conversation in January, is that our partners at the MBTA are also iterating on their designs. Their bus stop guidelines from 2025, it's like a tremendous change and exciting standard that we didn't have 5 or so years ago, because everyone was still kind of figuring out what are floating bus stops, what do we do with them. And same with the transit signal priority specifications. So that's a lot of information to say that in some ways there's no specific formula for making a design decision. We're always trying to follow, like we said, that guiding light of safety and sustainable options, work within all these frameworks, as well as incorporate all the ideas that we gather along the way. And one I probably didn't know is that also learning from our own designs. I didn't say how mobility actually, like there's things that we learned from a project or so a year ago that you're like, oh, I will definitely incorporate that later as we develop designs. So kind of taking some of that information, we wanted to talk through some of the challenges. So standards and best practices change over time. We continue to adapt and change designs on what we learn best, from best practices both across the country and the world. I mentioned about floating bus stops. Like when we were looking at plans in 2021, just the options and what we know now is so different in 2026, and that's really exciting. The same for protected bike lanes. Like 10 years ago, there weren't standards of, how much buffer should you have, or what type of material should you use, or when you're constructing it, what's a good way to like construct a hot, or is it HMA? I always mess that one up. Hot mixed asphalt protected bike lane, which now we have. So as more of these types of facilities are implemented, we learn better ways to design, construct, and maintain. We also need to meet operational needs. So this is a photo of us testing turns at Medford Street and Pearl Street. So when we were talking to you all about changing, like, do we T Medford into Pearl? Do we actually do the opposite? We went out there and we tested every configuration with the tower truck. So we can make sure that fire can still, that they feel confident that they can still meet their commitments to, reach emergency calls very fast. But that we can work to our goals of increasing safety. Some other things that we look at with fire is, this is about making the turns. That's where sometimes we might have to pull back a curb extension. Because if you can't fit a fire truck around that corner and that fire truck runs there about 20 times a week, that's another safety consideration that we really, that's really important for us to figure out. So field testing is commonly used during the design process to fine tune our final designs. And like I said, we try to follow those standard regulations. And they may only provide a minimum standard and not necessarily the preferred design. So that's also something that when we go back out, it's trying to figure out, does that also work well for the public? I feel like I threw a lot of information at folks, but I think we were trying to tease out that these are some of the guidelines that we follow when we're developing designs and trying to make decisions. But there's no hard and fast rule. I think one thing that we're really proud of in Somerville is that we don't try to operate from like, it's a majority decision. You know, I think sometimes we've been in some of the public engagement spaces and someone's like, well, if we brought 50 people and they all oppose this, would you change your minds? And well, we want to also make sure we're meeting the goals of what the city has charged folks like me and Justin to do, which is to implement Vision Zero. So we want to provide more context of how we get to some of those decisions. Any questions?
Folks online, if you want to raise your hand. I think Laura is already up. Go for it, Laura.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that a lot of these projects are like very custom and bespoke, and there's a lot of thinking about each particular project and the needs of all the, each project and sort of doing separate community engagement about every new project. But I also saw the slide with the quick build that, a quick build timeline is something like 2.5 years. And I'm wondering about how you think about the trade-off between those two things.
Oh, Laura, that's a great question. And we thought about that when we were using the Elm Beacon timeline because Elm Beacon just took longer than we had first anticipated because of actually a lot of the tweaks and changes we wanted to make to meet some of the community feedback that we had gotten, as well as it involves so much of changing this, like how the intersections operated with the signals. So typically we do try to run on a 12 to 18 month timeline. I think we were trying to highlight that generally kind of like what are the time brackets. Like when we do a project, like a quick build probably has 2 of these public phases and then we move into final design. So I think your question was trade-offs around time, correct? And like when we're deciding to make a quick build, are you trying to say
if we sort of agreed up front that sort of these are how we would do projects like this, of this category, would that be a trade-off in being able to implement them faster and more of them is kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah, I think it could be. And I think at this time, we could move faster. We have found that just as much as it's important to hear feedback on a specific project, we also, you all know Brad, coalition building and momentum is really important. And if we can get closer to what are the needs of people who use the street, you can talk more about the nuances that, like Justin and I have been in spaces where you might have a business owner who is very skeptical of what you're doing, may not want you to do it. But over time, as we build this relationship, we can both agree on the purpose and the goal, and then have a pathway of communicating so that when there needs to be other changes or ways to mitigate that impact, we can. So this time we found that we think that there's value to taking a bit more time to get more specific. We also learn a lot, like there's something that we might think is safer and then come to find out that getting that public feedback, all of a sudden we didn't know that maybe at 3 p.m. that day, there's a mad rush because of the preschool let out, or you're able to tweak the design to better meet that need. And sorry if I'm drawing on specific examples that don't make sense in context.
And I guess I'd add that I think we do weigh that trade-off when we pick the engagement type. Like that's the informed campaigns are the ones where we think we can move a little bit faster. Middlesex Ave is a great example because there are really a handful of the butters and we weren't fundamentally changing the street. And I think for projects that are more involved, that are in the dense neighborhoods, we do get a lot out of talking to people. And I think it's a difference between just like doing something and actually like hearing people's feedback, and often come out and can find creative solutions that allow the city to meet its transportation goals, but address some of the concerns that we're hearing. And yeah, the Elm Beacon one is longer than typical. I think for a quick, it's more in the 12 to 18 month timeline preferred. But it does take some time.
Can you talk more about what happens between or after design finishes? And how is the handoff process to another department, or do you select contractors who actually implement? Do you manage themselves or not?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So I'll start first with the reconstruction ones because those are very typical projects. So it's already the payment, because it's through the payment sidewalk management program, that is the engineering division's program. So we are in close dialogue with them throughout the design development. But as we move towards a final design, that's where we really start to transition who is managing the project. So that it primarily gets taken on by our senior streetscapes manager, who brings it to 100% construction documents and prepares it with the consultant for bid. And then in Massachusetts, you put out for a public bid, and then you take the lowest bidder if they meet all the other specifications. And so the lowest bidder is then awarded the contract. And then that contractor is managed by the engineering division, and primarily the senior streetscape manager. But we kind of all stay in close dialogue. Did I miss anything in that practice?
No, yeah, I think it sometimes varies by project, but like after 75%, like we're ramping down, they're ramping up, and like 100%, it's really give it to them and they take care of the bid and all of that. We're still involved with construction, but more like troubleshooting, helping understand the design intent. But really, it's engineering's job to build these things.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's DPW to maintain.
Yeah. And when it comes to actually when the work is being constructed, we also have staff members who are dedicated to the communications of that work. Now if there's design inquiries and stuff like that, we kind of get tapped back in and we can answer that. But where someone might be speaking to someone like me or Justin more in a project in the design development, as it moves to being implemented, that's more of the engineering folks and the construction public information officer. For Quick Build, it's a little different. And Quick Build is primarily the design development, and the implementation is primarily managed by the mobility division, which also kind of, Laura, it makes me think of, it goes back to some of that time that you're talking about, because when we put together our work plans, we have to account for that that part of our job will pivot and we become part of the managers of the contractor. So when Elm Beacon Connector goes into play, the project manager will manage that, and then our team will manage any inquiries that come in around, oh, hey, I saw the no parking signs up. Are the contractor coming tonight to do the markings? That will be primarily facilitated by us, which then would take up space of us maybe doing that work on a different kind of project. We do still work closely with engineering because our traffic engineers primarily manage all of our pavement markings implementation. But we do bid out for these kind of larger projects. But something, there's sometimes with our Quick Build projects, we can use some of that existing contract, but most of the time it's bid out as its own project.
And a lot of this has been iterative over time, and due to a really good relationship that we've built with engineering, where they trust us with the design aspect, and that allows them to focus more on constructability and implementation. So it's a really good partnership.
And after they finish, do you see some responsibility to communicating back to the folks that you got the first impressions about the project years ago?
One fun thing of working in the city is it never really stops.
We're never done.
No, I mean, Justin and I are very lucky to have been doing this work for a bit of time, and folks you talked to 4 or 5 years ago, you still talk to. And they still tell you how they feel about changes to the street. But are you talking about more an evaluation type?
Well, it's usually in the beginning, we see it here as well. We have ideas.
Yeah.
And some of those ideas are just our guesses on how well things would work. And it would be nice to close the circle and see we implemented it, we tested it, it did work or it didn't work, and maybe we get some learnings out of it. I'm not sure who, and if there's any management to this process.
Yeah.
Or if this process is even there.
No, it's actually something we've been exploring more now that we've been able to develop a little bit more standards of this, like let's say the reconstruction projects and standard pipeline of projects. We are now trying to determine how do you evaluate some of that type of work. You know, one of the easiest things we first look at is speeds and volumes. So most of our projects, we do a before and an after, because that is one way for us to tell. We can also sometimes look at our, you know, our intersections turning movement count, so we can get an estimate of, oh, do we actually see an increase of the amount of people biking on that street when we made some of these changes? We haven't developed kind of a standard evaluation process yet. To be honest, it's really fun to kind of compare the projects. If you take a Washington Street, and I'm looking at the photo up here, it might be quite a different project than Holland Street, which was the project done right before this. And the next project that was done after, or that's being implemented right now is Tough Street. So Tough Street is going to be a reconstructed neighborhood, which is very different from an arterial, or like more of a main street that has a bus route and protected bike lanes. So we're trying to figure out what are the questions to ask, and then to determine what is success. So there's like the easy baseline of like the data that we can collect, like the speed and volumes, but then what are the larger evaluation? Like for us, we put on floating bus stops on Washington Street. Instead of looking at ridership numbers, which we know have increased because the 109 is just more service, are we actually impacting delay? And because our goal was to reduce some of the delay with some of the floating bus stops, but it was also to increase safety, especially for people biking. So we're still just kind of figuring that out. And that's where we start to kind of publish some of the information that we do get in our KPIs.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I guess along those lines, I'm wondering about the sort of opportunities to provide input on things that fall in that inform category, and just sort of for the future. Like my sense is that the speed humps are very popular and people like them after they get installed. But I'm wondering, you know, if you're hearing a lot of negative feedback about those, but people who feel positively aren't, you know, coming forward. Sort of, is there an opportunity where like PTAC or other kind of, you know, people in the community could or should be providing impact, input on those things that are in that inform category?
That's a great question. I mean, speed humps, especially because that's been slightly newer to our portfolio too. You know, as we shared in the KPI tagging last month, we probably got, what was it, like 145 requests for traffic calming. And so that was one measure for us to kind of feel, okay, like we're hitting some of the demand. And then I think we included in the KPI tag, maybe not for the individual PTAC one, but we do the slide deck of the difference between requests for it and complaints. And our complaints, I think, were closer to 15. I will say when we're deciding to look at where to locate speed humps, anything that comes in through 311, like whether it's one person or 30 people, if they mention the street, we actually put that on our consideration list, so that when we look to collect data in the spring and fall, we try to select maybe like 10 or so streets that are purely just came in from like 311 inquiries. So that's one way that technically to inform campaign we go to implement, but there's ways that there's been public input kind of leading up to that. But around, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's ways for us to kind of think that through, especially like intersections too. Like we've tried to think more in a data-driven process. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, the informed ones are primarily about raising awareness and making sure people know that it's coming. Like not necessarily gonna have the feedback loop, but more like making sure people aren't surprised. So I think maybe there could be, certainly it'd be nice to have help getting out the word.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Like we'll even put like flyers by where we're about to locate one, but you'll still get a call that's like, this thing is in front of my house. Like, what did you do? And you're like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think our feeling with the speed humps is that demand seems to be like off the charts, and we do get some complaints, but we've worked out a lot of the kinks with markings and signs, and you know, the complaints are pretty minimal these days.
Anybody?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you guys, for like the bigger reconstruction projects, if you do any public engagement around like the construction timeline, or like how the construction is like how the sequence moves.
we try to tell that kind of in the story of the project. So when we're out kind of providing an overview or background, trying to really be clear of like, what is the implementation timeline? We found that, right, like that's where it can feel the most nerve-wracking is someone's like, okay, are you coming or not coming? If there is construction, how long will it go on? Who can I talk to? What's really cool is engineering's always had a dedicated person that there's like a cell phone number you can call. So that when something, like we might communicate about something occurring on the street and then the detour gets changed, there's someone to call and be able to communicate about that. But we also try to tell generally how that reconstruction happens. Kind of like we said, we say that we always start with one side of the street on the sidewalk. Sidewalk work always comes first. We try to communicate the most about the construction experience kind of near the end of the project, especially because we have a better idea of what it will look like. And then that's when our construction public information officer steps in too.
Yeah. When we're in design, usually the only thing we can say is something like this, this is the window, because we know we're going to put out a contract and we're going to give someone 2 construction seasons to do it. So unfortunately, then we can't give a lot more detailed information. And when you're putting out a construction bid, we, in general, and this is more engineering's realm, but the fewer restrictions around you have to do this and that, order and what you have to do, the more of that kind of stuff that you add, the more expensive a project tends to be. But that being said, once we have a contractor on board, our project websites get used then by the engineering group to post look aheads and that sort of thing, what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. And we do try to keep to those 2 years. That's the contract period. And like Kate said, for sidewalks, doing one side at a time works out most of the time, doesn't always work out. And then having that dedicated phone number. So I think it's hard to forecast the whole project, but they try to give sort of regular updates, look ahead, that sort of thing.
One thing we've also tried with sometimes mixed response too is that if there's been quite a gap between when we finalized the design and then it was moving to construction, engineering might say, we're actually just going to host an informational meeting. So for example, for Tough Street, they put out notes to folks on the street and said, we're hosting a meeting this time. This is the construction information that we have. You can meet the team that are running the construction. And that was a way of we didn't have that much connectivity because of just how the contracts worked out. I shouldn't say the connectivity, it was more we had finalized and then just by the time that the construction was going to occur, there was just been quite a bit of time. So sometimes that's a tool that they use, but it can be dependent on the street and kind of where the final design ended too.
And if you happen to be a direct abutter, the contractor is responsible for providing notices of disruptions to driveways and sidewalks and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's supplemented by the same city alerts you get for snow emergencies. We'll do geographic specific ones for construction.
Around how many different contractors end up working with the city for both the reconstruction and also quick builds?
What's the universe of contractors?
How many different contractors does the city end up getting bids from?
It really varies by the project, and that's something that engineering has been working on for years, is cultivating more people to bid in our project. If you take a look at the West Pearl bid results, it's pretty exciting. I think we got 4 or 5 people bidding on that project, which is one of the most I've ever seen. There are many years where it was 1 or 2. So it's sort of growing, and part of that has to do with contractors getting more experience, word of mouth, how is it to work with the city, that sort of thing, and the type of work. We have one contractor that worked on Pearl Street, and they were a subcontractor to the paver, but they actually ended up doing all of the curb work, the sidewalk work, all that stuff. And then a few years later, and then now they're the ones bidding on the contract because they've had experience doing all that kind of specialty work. So it's the kind of thing where we can end up with anyone, if they're the low bidder, they're qualified, they're the low bidder. We end up working with new folks, but the more consistent we are with our design specs and the timing and that sort of thing, starting to grow. And there's some things where there's really a small number, like the pavement markings. There's only like 2 or 3 that really even operate in this area. That can be more limited depending on the materials we're using. Traffic signals, another thing, quite limited the number of traffic signal contractors. So a handful to a couple dozen and growing all the time, I think is the answer.
Good. On a similar note, like with the bid system, if you have if you work with a contractor who's caused delays in projects, or there's just some issue with the implementation, are you still obligated to go with them if they bid lowest?
It's again, it's a little out of Kate and I's wheelhouse. There are processes for doing that. You have to really document everything that happens, and that we follow the 40B law for procurement, which is statewide law, which obligates lowest bidder, but there are arguments to be made about people being not qualified, that sort of thing. There are minimum quality standards, and then the city can, work on if there's issues with particular contractors. You can't just say, no, I don't like them, that doesn't work. But there are processes around that. I think we're a little less familiar with how that stuff works.
I had an unrelated question about quick build projects that obviously for something like Elm Beacon that's making so many changes that even though it's quick build, it's a very involved project. But are there ways that, because quick build is literally not set in stone the way a full reconstruction project is, of accelerating quick build projects that aren't as that have more abutters than Middlesex have, but still accelerating that timeline because of the ability to make changes afterward? You had talked about for some other restriping that you can, that DPW can do that and it doesn't need to be contracted out. And did I misunderstand that?
No, some other cities have that where their departments of public works could do pavement markings works. That is not part of Somerville.
Okay.
But maybe to answer your question is, one thing one of our team members always says is Quickbuild is kind of probably not a great brand or brand name, because it's a lot quicker to install, but it doesn't actually mean quicker to design. And most of the time, the way that we look at quick builds is because you're trying to build partnerships and momentum, we want these projects to generally work very well. So if we put something on the street and immediately you watched maybe all the flex posts get run over because no one can fit around the corner, or fire has been absolutely not. You just hampered our operations, and we have to pull it out, which is also a waste of resources. We really try to actually meet what you would want to design with curb, but recognizing that there's only so many tools you have when it is a flex post or marking. So it still takes us that kind of typical 12 months to design, because we're trying to make it so that what would really work long-term on the street, as well as most time when we put a quick build in, it is there for many years. So we try to play with some of that flexibility, but it actually doesn't change too much when it comes to the design and for our internal work.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question on that. Are things like Jersey barriers or those water-filled barriers on the table for quick builds, or I didn't see them on the slide and I'm forgetting what?
Typically not. We have, I think we've had at various times used them. They really, particularly the water-filled ones, they move quite a bit more than you would think possible. We're constantly looking for how do we make them more like real projects. We've done some work with the precast concrete. That's a sort of technically not quick build, but it's not construction that we've been trying to explore how to use more. In Assembly Square, we've used those Cicla, sort of flex post adjacent products, but are supposed to be sort of better and more durable. So there's, I think, over time, maybe there's a little bit of a blending and convergence. I think we first start from mostly signs and lines, expos, but there are other treatments out there, and yet we're open to testing different things and see how they work.
That reminds me on a related note to that. I know the city of Boston has started exploring cast in place curbs as a sort of more quick build adjacent than like full construction. Is that something Somerville's looking into?
Yeah, we're looking into it. They invited us to a little show and tell a few months back, which is cool, and it's interesting. There is some construction there. It's sometimes something we're looking at. We haven't used it yet.
When you do quick builds, do we have enough knowledge now to know if they are likely going to speed up or reduce the next level of the project, say moving a curb to remove the flex post and then you move the curb to the right location?
Oh, like, will quick build impact us?
Yeah, how do we make how do we make them permanent?
Not yet, mainly because we're like with Elm Beacon, we knew we weren't gonna have the chance to do construction. It's not on the paving plan. There weren't other mechanisms to do that at the time. But we wanted to put in the safer facilities.
Yeah.
So right now we're using quick build when we can't use construction. Doesn't mean that we're not looking for opportunities, and that's really Justin mentioned grant opportunities and things like that in the future.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily slow down or speed up. It's like the paving plan is really not about bike network plan, right? The paving plan is about what is the condition of the sidewalk and the pavement, and then we use the quick builds to like plug the holes that is not filled with our various plans. But sometimes it can be about like making like a test case, right? It allows you to try something out without having to fundamentally transform everything. You can check out Somerville Ave near Vinyl Bakery, the street view over time. It's like we actually did iterate like 4 or 5 different designs there. I think it's a nice proving ground, so to speak.
Nice.
Do you happen to know what the schedule is for engineering releasing those plans? Because it seems like the last one they published was the 2024 fiscal year plan for the road and sidewalk.
I don't think we have the schedule, but it doesn't always happen every year, the update. They're like doing their survey of a third of the city every year. But yeah, they usually post it on the paving and sidewalk management program, and they present it to city council. I'm totally sure when the next one is due, but I think you're right. There was not an update in 2025 that I'm aware of.
For the contractors and especially talking about snow clearing that we have been focusing at, when they don't do the snow clearing the way we want them to, what happens? Who is involved? Does it come back to you guys at all, or is just ISD and the regular enforcers out there?
Yeah, I know it's a slightly different contractor probably than the ones that we've been talking about since we're talking much more about implementation. If anyone had the chance, there was actually a presentation last night by our interim DPW commissioner at the, I think the committee for the city council is called, I'm sorry, they just changed their name, Sustainability and Infrastructure, where interim commissioner Eric Wiseman kind of really went into depth about kind of our relationship with those type of contractors and just like how that works in snow operations now. We just had the chance to just start to see some of that material, so we probably can't speak specifically to that, but I would recommend if anyone's interested in digging into that. The presentation included kind of generally what's our approach, as well as a little bit of like, Eric's turn was a postmortem on the specific season. So that might be a really great reference. I'm sorry, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but it might be easier with looking at DPW's response yesterday. And that recording is available if you prefer to watch it.
Cool. Anybody else? Any other questions? Our guests online, do you guys have any questions? Or comments? I guess not. Well, we can finish a little earlier. thank you so much, everybody. See you next month.
Right before we break, sorry, I just want to quickly share, as some of you might know, I'm anticipating going on maternity leave rather soon, so I won't see you all for a couple of months. So, I mean, you're all in great hands with Justin, who does most of the work anyway. But I want to see you and good luck in your work in the next couple of months, and I'll see you when I'm slightly smaller.
Nice. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.